Hi, welcome to tutorial on Android. This is part 1 of the tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to create a simple Android app, but before that, we're going to get the setup done first. Now, the setup steps are quite time consuming, so I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but to start off, you need to open developer.android.com on your browser, and on the front page you'll see the link for get the SDK. Click on get the SDK. Now you have a choice between getting the Eclipse ADT Android Developer Tools or the Android Studio Beta. Between the two, I personally prefer Eclipse, but if you have to get a tool other than Eclipse, then Android Studio Beta is a good choice. Here's a comparison between Android Studio and Eclipse. So in this tutorial, we're going to follow the steps for Android Studio Beta, for Eclipse rather. So you'll be clicking on this link, and after you follow all the steps, um, it should give you this zip file which you unzip. I've already done that, so I have an instance of Eclipse on my computer called Eclipse ADT, which is open right here. So the other thing after you install the ADT is you have to upgrade your tools. So you'll be clicking on this green icon right here, and it brings up the Android Sdk Manager. The Android Sdk Manager contains a list of tools and API levels which are required for building your project. In my case, most of it is already installed, but in case your tools are not installed or they're not updated, you can go ahead and update them. So in my case, there's a few updates that I haven't updated, so I'm going to select them and say install and accept the license and hit install. So that should take about a minute. While that's installing, I'm going to give you a tour of all the resources that are available on the developer.android.com website. So when you go to the front page, you can click on browse samples, which contains samples for projects. Now, instead of downloading each sample, you can just click on a category and it takes you to that particular sample. For instance, in this case, you can implement a alarm using the alarm manager. So we'll look at different samples in future tutorials, but for the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to write our own code. So let's see how the Eclipse installation is doing. It seems to be complete. So it says done loading packages. You can close the Android Sdk Manager. The other thing that gets installed as part of your Android developer tools is the Android Virtual Device Manager. Now, the Android Virtual Device Manager contains emulators For instance, I have an emulator running on my machine which looks like this. As you can see, it just looks like a regular Android phone with the applications button, the widgets, and it also has all the regular buttons like back, home, and the recent apps button. So we're going to go back here to our Eclipse and we're going to say file, new Android application project. In this case, we're going to select a simple name, for instance, my first Android app. Use all the defaults down here, including project name and package name. Under min required SDK, we can select the value to be 14, since that's the Android 4.0 SDK. And for target SDK, we can select the KitKat version, which is 19. The on here Android L is also listed as API 21, but it's still in developer preview, so we're not going to use that for this tutorial. Now the next thing we need to do is use a compile with target. The higher the compilation SDK, the better it is. So let's select 19, since the target SDK API level is also 19. The theme can be Hollow Light, and hit next. These are all the defaults, the configuration for the project, so we can select the defaults, hit next. These are the assets that are going to be used in the application, so we can the one change we can make here is the background color. So in my case, I prefer a darker color, so let's select like a dark blue, or yeah, okay, so that's good. Hit next. The activity should be blank, and hit next. And we can select the default main activity in this case and hit finish. So because this is an introductory tutorial, we're going to create a simple application that reacts to a button click and prints hello world on the screen. So in this case, I have activity underscore main. This activity underscore main.xml is in my resource layout activity underscore main folder. In Eclipse, the Android project has a certain structure which includes these source, gen, bin, libs, res folders. It also has the libraries that this project is using, which is the Android SDK framework libraries in this case. So we're going to double click on main activity to open the file, and we can see that there's already some code stepped out for us. In activity underscore main, we also want to look at the XML. So in this case, this is our XML. Notice that there's already a text view under activity underscore main, which has hello world written there. To make things a little simpler, I'm going to set that to invisible. So I'm going to say Android :visibility equals gone. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is click back on main activity and notice that we have some lifecycle methods already stubbed out. I'm going to cover lifecycle methods later, but just remember that onCreate is a lifecycle method. If you hover over any method, it tells you, it gives you the Java docs for it. The same goes for classes. So in our case, we're going to create a button. So the button needs to be before the text view. In this case, I have to give an ID to the text view. So I'm going to call it text view 1. Now here I'm going to type button. Sometimes the auto suggest takes a while to show up. Hit space and type Android ID equals at plus ID button 1 Android ID layout underscore width equals wrap content Android layout underscore height equals wrap content. And so we have pretty much everything we need. Now the next thing we're going to do is select a relative position for the text view. We're going to say that it needs to be below the button. So in this case, I'm going to say ID button 1. Save that. Now if we go to our graphical layout, we should be able to see the text view on the button. Now the text view is actually not visible, so that's because it's set to invisible. If I set it back to visible, we should be able to see it in graphical layout. So there it is. Now I'm going to say Android text equals at string label underscore click label underscore button 1. So this is the label for button 1, and to provide that string constant, we can go to res values strings.xml, open that, go to the XML view and create the resource here. So string name label underscore button 1, and we'll just call it click me. Okay, so now we have all the code for the layout. Now we just need to add the logic. So this main activity here can be thought of as the view controller in an MVC pattern. So what we do in the view controller is essentially send messages to the view and obtain data from the models. We don't have any data or models in this application, but if we did, we could have used the main activity to query the models for information. So in this case, I'm just going to create two private properties, one being a button and the other being a text view, and use the convention of putting a lowercase m prefix on properties. Now notice that it's complaining. Whenever it complains, you can hover over and say import, and Eclipse will just import that. So that's one of the cool things about using an IDE. Okay, so now you have two properties, a button property and a text view property. Now we just need to import or instantiate the properties. So I say find view by ID r dot id dot the button ID, and what this does is it obtains a reference to the button that was in the layout. Similarly for text view, I use the find view by ID framework method and say text view 1. Okay, so that's so far so good. Now we need to add a click handler on the button. So the way to add click handlers is really simple. We use a callback. So in this case, I'm going to set an on click listener. So I say new view dot on click listener, and that's basically it. So it generated the snippet for on click listener down here, and the method that gets called when the on click listener receives the touch event or the click event is the on click method. So I invoke the thing that I need in my on click method. So in this case, I say m text view dot set text button was clicked and close semicolon and hit save. Now this should compile and it should even run. So let's run it. So to run it, I just right click on the project, hit run as Android application, and what this does is it finds the emulator that's already been started and it's going to try to run it on that emulator. Watch down here for the status of the operation, and hopefully it should run pretty fast. The first compile takes a bit of time. Okay, so it's already launched the application down here. So yeah, so if I just click on it, it's going to come to the foreground. Okay, so now I can say click me and the button was clicked. So our application works great. Anyway, so that was an introduction to Android. See you in the next tutorial.